Happy second Sunday after Easter, and I appreciate you guys' forbearance there. Happy Easter from last week. I wanted to say Happy Easter to y'all, but had a bit of a reaction to my second COVID shot, so was feeling a tad under the weather. But luckily I perked up somewhat on Easter, and then much better now, so very good. And you'll notice that my hair is almost long enough to cut, because as I've mentioned, my hope is to get it long enough to donate, but it has to be 11 inches to donate, and right now it's 10 inches, so I need to get to like 11 and a half, so I'm not bald when I donate it. I don't want to be bald. So I'm hoping to get to 11 and a half or even 12, so I have something. And then I'm hoping never to donate hair again, because I gotta tell you, I did it once before and I didn't like it, and now this is the second time and I like it even less. Long hair is a pain. I'm glad I was too young for the whole hippie thing, and then I went to Asbury College where you weren't allowed to have long hair. It had to be right at the collar. I'd have gotten 25 demerits for this. It would have been ridiculous. Of course, you couldn't have a beard either, so which I did like to have, but couldn't do it at Asbury. I don't know what they do now, but when I was there, it had to be short hair, no beard, and a few other rules, but it managed to get through, so there it was. So Easter Sunday has happened, and now we're on the road from Easter to Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. That was what the Jewish celebration was, Penta, 5. And so the celebration of Pentecost was going to be 50 days after the Passover celebration. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. But remember, Passover is a process. It wasn't just a one-time thing, although it does have to do also with Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement and all that. But so we're on our way to that. And of course, for Christians, Pentecost being the birth of the church is like a big deal. That's sort of where we're going. So notice what's happening here. I'm going to read the first part of the passage, and it's familiar to y'all, and so here it is. And this is John 20, and starting in verse 19. The disciples were afraid of the Jewish leaders, and on the evening of that same Sunday they locked themselves in the room. Suddenly Jesus appeared in the middle of the group. He greeted them and showed them his hands and his side, and when the disciples saw the Lord, they became very happy. After Jesus greeted them again, he said, "I am sending you just as the Father had sent me." And then he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Now, I've mentioned before that the word spirit, pneuma, is how they'd have said it. When we talk about pneumatic tires, we don't pronounce the P like we do in most Greek-derived words that start with a P. We don't, psychology, you don't say psychology, and we don't say pneumatic, but the Greeks did. They would have pronounced it pneuma. And so when he breathed on them, now, breathed wasn't the same word as spirit, but air was. Air, wind, spirit, all were the same word. So if you were reading it in a totally secular way, it would have been holy air, holy wind. So from that standpoint, they Uh, they recycled that same word. So we understand spirit from what he's saying, but we understand the context. Now you say, well, but it's capitalized. Wouldn't have been back then. It would have been just regular, written out words. Pneuma hagios, and that would have been, holy air, Holy Spirit. So when he breathed on them, we don't do that now as part of it. The pastor didn't call you up and say, oh, receive the Holy Spirit. But that was symbolic for Jesus to have done that at that moment for them. But notice also what happened before that. That they were in the upper room, still afraid. They were locked up in there, afraid of what was coming down. Because the political situation hadn't changed. It hadn't. Jesus had been seen by a lot of people, but the people that were trying to arrest his followers and that were angry at his followers, they were still around, still doing their stuff. So they recognized that there was still a danger in being out and about, and they didn't like it. They were feeling vulnerable from that standpoint. And Jesus' resurrection, in the one sense, changed everything. They recognized that Jesus had beaten death, beaten death, which is incredible. And that's what the whole point of last week's celebration was. Actually, of course, as I mentioned during Lent, that's the point of every Sunday. That's why we call it the Lord's Day. The whole point of every single Sunday, that why we worship on Sunday instead of Saturday, because we recognize that Saturday is still the Sabbath. That didn't change. But we meet on the first day, we worship God on the first day, because it is a small Easter. Every week, we recognize with each other the incredible thing that happened at Easter, and we relive it. We relive it every week. We get to say, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Because it's still true on the second Sunday of Easter as it was on Easter Sunday. That God's power in our life is still there, is still as vital and as active as important. So it's pretty cool from that standpoint. But notice that the disciples were afraid for their lives, even though they had seen God's power work. That didn't mean that they necessarily wanted to be, killed. They were a little reticent about that, which, hard to blame them from that reality. And you recognize that their fear is, based on what they see in the world around them, and they're letting that affect them. Now, come Pentecost, that whole thing is going to flip, and it's going to be quite a different story. But right now, we see that their fear is really well founded. It's well founded in the fact that the authorities really still want them dead. So that the on the one hand, the reality of Jesus' resurrection is undeniable. Here he is. They've seen him. Now they've seen him again. Now, if you keep reading in 19, you'll see the bit with Thomas and how he's doubting what's going on, and say, I got to see him myself. But the the disciples who were there, though they recognize the reality of Jesus' resurrection, they don't doubt it. Well, he's right here. Here he is. They touch his hand. They physically touch him. So they know it's, that it's a real thing. Here's the man they spent all those years with, and now they're touching the very wounds that contributed to his death. So there's no doubt of the reality of what happened in his life. They're not doubting that. They're part of it. They recognize it here in their midst. And yet, the fear in their life is based on the fact as though they haven't fully embraced it. Which, I've got to say, I myself have experienced. I've experienced that very thing. That there are times when I recognize the reality of Jesus rising from the grave, and I don't doubt it. But living in its reality is something else entirely. Living as though it has transformed a fundamental part of my life is different than just giving it verbal assent, even touching the physical reality. So if Jesus, were there in the midst of my fear, it wouldn't necessarily change my fear until it happens here. And as I recognize that Jesus' work on the cross, Jesus rising from the dead, has transformed my life to where I need no longer fear, because my life is safe in him. Now, I'd love to say that I do that 100% every time. And you would probably know that my nose should be growing right about then, because it's just not the case. The fact is that there are times when I still act out of that. I still act as though that my life isn't safe in Jesus, that my life isn't secure as a child of his, and that he hasn't taken care of it. And I think that he must shake his head the same way that he shook his head with Thomas. Thomas, yeah, here I am, man. But you could live in the reality all the time. You could live in the power of that reality every day through the power of the Holy Spirit. And it took the disciples a while to get it, to figure it out, to be there in that moment. And when they finally did, of course, the world changed. The world changed because they embraced that idea that their life in God was, unstoppable. That everybody needed to hear the incredible news that Jesus had changed the reality of the world, had fundamentally changed the reality of the world. So it became the actuality of what Jesus had been talking about all that time during his ministry, that the kingdom was going to radically alter the fabric of the world. And when the kingdom is realized, finally, when Jesus comes back, it will be because the change that you and I are living into now will be finally made whole, made real. But we can live as citizens of the kingdom now in the power of the resurrection. We can live as citizens of the kingdom, like we're already citizens of the kingdom. Because, well, we are. We are citizens of the kingdom. We belong as Jesus' people. and as people who are part of God's work in the world. It's incredible that you and I can do that. That we can live in two realities, really. The disciples right now are still living in the old reality of, oh no, the people are mad at me, I better be afraid. It won't be long till they recognize that their citizenship in the kingdom and the power of being disciples of Jesus means that the people that are actively working against God don't have that authority anymore. That's gone. And that's part of why getting together is important. Why church is important is that we encourage one another with that. We say, yay, go. It is a tough slog sometimes. Sometimes we're going up the river and it's tough. It reminds me of one time quite a while ago when I was in the scout troop and we were going up the Withlacoochee River, and there was one part that was choked with hydrilla, with the lake weeds that grow on the surface, and they kind of grow these bulbs that are all like styrofoam almost, except it was a half a mile choked full of these weeds. And so the first canoe would, go into it and just lose all their mint. And so the guy in front would have to, like break it open, and the guy in back would go. And then someone over there was doing it. And finally, about, 10, 20 yards in, after a half hour of just hacking away at these weeds, somebody realized that if we got in a line, that the first person breaking the weeds would in fact break it for everybody in the line. But that if we spread out, everybody would have to do all that work every time. And that if the first person did it and then led another canoe in front and then they did it and then led another canoe in front and then they did it, that you only had to work for about 10 or 15 minutes on the hardest part. And that everybody could participate in everybody getting through by supporting each other in that work. And sometimes you were in the back, rolling along and pushing through. Sometimes you're in the front, hacking away, doing the sweaty hard work. But that when we all participated, nobody had to bear the brunt all by themselves, and everybody got to be a part of it. And we got through that way. Luckily, when we got to the next part, stuff with hydrilla, there was a dude with a motorboat, and he towed us all through. It's like, where were you last time, man? But that one time we did support each other, and so that was pretty cool that we could be there for one another, just like we are in church, just like we support one another in this continuing effort of being members of God's kingdom and realizing what it means to be ones who are actively able to live in the reality of the resurrection, which is incredible that we get to do it and that I get to do it with you guys. So that's pretty cool. So happy second Sunday of Easter, happy Easter season, and I love you guys, and I'll see you later. Bye.